Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dubcast with Dubside. I'm Andrew Alzaga, and I'm very excited to be hosting this episode today because my guest is James Manke, international sea kayak instructor and participant in the 2014 National Greenland Kayaking Championships. James was our second special guest on the show 3.5 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long. So, welcome, James. It's great to have you back.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be a part of the Dubcast show. Thanks for reaching out.
So you're originally from Canada. You were living in Victoria and in Ucluelet, but now you're calling from Costa Rica.
Yeah, a little bit of a different place for sure. Victoria is kind of where I lived for a number of years, about 10 or 12 years I lived there. And then we moved up to Ucluelet up on the west coast of Vancouver Island.
So how did you end up in Costa Rica?
So Costa Rica, I think, has always kind of been on my bucket list. I've been to Costa Rica a couple times before. My daughter did live here for a little while, and so we did come and visit before. And when we were here, we just fell in love with it. It's a very diverse place, lots of wildlife. And the one thing that attracts me, I think personally, is the surf. There is some absolutely spectacular surfing here in Costa Rica. And I think also the hot weather, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in the winters in Canada and the Pacific Northwest can be a little bit chilly in the winter time. And
Oh, it's so gloomy this time of year.
yeah, exactly. And I've heard some very big storms too this year. So
Yeah.
Costa Rica is definitely a little bit of the opposite of that. We've got some very good weather here in Costa Rica. So yeah, but Costa Rica has always been on the bucket list for myself and Kim. And so yeah, that's where that move came from. We were up in Ucluelet for a number of years, and when we were up there, we were running the wreckage. So I was running a kayak museum up in Ucluelet, and we were going through the transition of a not-for-profit organization, only to discover that there were some heavy permits that we would have to occur and an inspection of the building, which was going to be a little bit of a hard thing to go through. So with the challenges that sort of came up there, we came to the conclusion that, maybe it's time to move forward. And Costa Rica was really the next thing on the list for us.
Mm-hmm.
And leading into that, just before we kind of discovered all of these challenges were happening with the wreckage, I was in Europe teaching with Stay Salty with Eichi Ito. And when I came back rather to Canada and discovered all these things were kind of hitting the fan, I went to Kim and I said to Kim, I said, all these things are happening. I said, I just came back from this really positive experience in Europe, and I'm just loving teaching. It's like I've kind of found my calling all over again,
Mm-hmm.
and absolutely in love with teaching kayak rolling specifically. And I said to Kim, I said, you know what? I just want to keep doing this. Like, I just want to travel around the world and I want to teach. That's where I feel I need to be right now. And that's what I want to do. And she said to me, well, if you're going to be traveling all over the world, she says, I don't really want to be stuck here in Ucluelet all the time. And I said, well, where do you want to be stuck? And her response was Costa Rica. And I swear to you, it was about maybe 30 minutes after we had that conversation. We went online and we bought one-way tickets to Costa Rica. And
Wow.
that was it. And after the tickets were bought, it was like, oh no, you just committed to buying tickets to Costa Rica. Now what? And I said, well, now it's real. Now we got to do it.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's really how Costa Rica came to be. It's always been a sort of a bucket list dream to come here and live here. And just with the way things were happening, it was just, yeah, it was sort of a sporadic moment of this is what we're doing next.
Now, Ucluelet is a pretty cool surfing town on the west coast of Vancouver Island, just south of Tofino and north of the Broken Group. There's some amazing sea kayaking there. Tell me about what you had set up there with the shipwreck.
So with the wreckage, really, I mean, that
The
was
wreckage, sorry.
yeah, the wreckage, yeah, that was Kim and I were living up in Ucluelet and attracted to the area because it's remote. It's up near some world-class surf breaks. And again, I'm quite into kayak surfing. And so we wanted a change of scenery. We were living up in the Ucluelet area. Really, the difference between Ucluelet and Tofino, I would say, is more kind of like a surf cultured kind of town, very touristy. And then when you get into Ucluelet, it's a bit more residential, more locals kind of living there, a little bit more of a homey type of feel. A lot of hippies and surfers kind of living in that particular area. And so we opted for Ucluelet over Tofino just because it had that sort of feel to it. And we were living there in our RV, our fifth wheel, which we had been living in for a number of years already, traveling. And while we were there, I was going through this kind of withdrawal of kind of building kayaks, skin on frame kayaks. And so I started to look for a location to build skin on frame kayaks. And I was looking at a number of different opportunities in the Ucluelet area, and nothing was really speaking to me. And one day I walked past the wreckage, and the wreckage is really an old uh, character building built by surfers and hippies many years ago, I think back in the late 50s. And it's got a big shipwreck outside the building. It's very much a tourist attraction. It's hard to miss when you go through Ucluelet. And I was walking by that building during this time, and the building at the time was kind of decrepit, falling apart, and it wasn't really looking like it was in very good shape. But I noticed that there was a lease sign in the window, and it was all kind of washed out from the sun, and I couldn't really make out what the phone number said on it. But I went and I put my hands on the window and I peeked inside that building, and it did not look good. There was water damage. I could see mold growing in the corners, but it was like I had this vision. I looked in and I could see what it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Oh my God, this is the place. Like this is where I need to be building kayaks. Like I could come in here, I could fix all of this up." And not only did I see kayaks in there, I saw it as a place where I could showcase skin on frame kayaks, and off to the corner was like a little sort of desk area. And I was like, man, there could be a small little retail section over here. There could be kayaks all along the ceiling and all wrapped around the walls. And then I could build kayaks over here on the left. And I just had this kind of vision. And I looked at the lease again and I tried to make out what the number said. And it was either this number or this number, and I couldn't really figure it out. But I started calling, and I got through to a lady's voicemail, and I left a message, and I said, "Hey, I'm really interested in renting the wreckage, and give me a call back." And a few days went by, and I hadn't heard back from her, and so I thought, "Oh, I'm gonna call again." And I'm going to be persistent, and I'm just going to keep calling. So every few days, I just kept calling and leaving a message. And I think it was probably a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks went by, and I still hadn't heard anything back. And I started talking to other locals in the area, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, good luck getting a hold of her. Like, everybody wants to rent that space, and nobody can seem to get a hold of her." And so I came up with an idea, and I thought, well, man, what if I called her and I offered to help her fix up the wreckage, and I helped bring it back for the city. So I called back and I left a message with that proposal saying, I'm happy to do work on the building at no charge. I just want to bring this back. I think this would be great for the locals. And I think I ended that conversation by saying, if it's about money, I said, I'm happy to throw, a year's lease down right up front right now.
Hmm.
And I hung up the phone, and I think it was about 10 minutes later, I got a phone call back.
Wow.
and I got a phone call back, and she said, "Are you serious? You're willing to like put a year's lease down?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I said, "I'm more than willing to put my money where my mouth is." And I said, "I'm happy to come in and fix this building and bring it back." And that kind of got her ears ringing, and she was very interested. And she said, "Okay, well, I need to make a couple of calls and make sure you're who you say you are." And so she ended up going online and like calling random kayakers and kayak companies saying, this James Manke guy, like, is he really who he says he is? And is he gonna do this? And everybody vouched for me, luckily.
Yeah.
And I got a call back from her again a few days later, and she said, "Yeah, I'm really interested in meeting up with you." And so she ended up coming. She lived in Victoria, or lives in Victoria, or Sydney rather, which is close to Victoria. And she drove up to Ucluelet, and we met in person. Very sweet lady, but she was still skeptical of me, not really sure, like if I was going to be delivering on my promise to like fix this place up and do all these things. And uh, we ended up signing a lease with her, a long-term lease. And she said, you can have this building, but you can't go in the backyard, and you can't do this, and you can't go over here, and everything else around this building, it's not yours. Like, you're just leasing this wreckage building, and that's it,
Hmm.
right? And I said,
Okay.
that's fair enough. Like, that sounds good to me. Like, no big deal. And I made her a deal to like start the lease after I had fixed up the building, because like I said, it was in pretty bad shape. So I went in and I spent 2 months, almost 2.5 months actually, just cleaning it out, gutting all out the rotten wood, replacing rotten wood. And I'd found different materials near the property that I could kind of replace things with. When I started, the flooring, for example, was all covered in plywood, or a good part of it anyway was covered in plywood, because the previous tenants that were in there had run a coffee shop, and that they had to put down flooring in order to make it sort of compliant with their permits. And I thought, man, this like old wood round floor that it has a really unique flooring that I could see in most of it. I was like, I bet you this is underneath all this plywood too. So I started peeling all this plywood out of there. And sure enough, there was this beautiful floor underneath it. A lot of it broken, but it was still there. And so I started to restore all the flooring in it. And I ripped all the plywood out of that building so that it became just this original kind of shell that it would have been back sort of in the 50s or 60s. And it was a lot of work, I'll tell you, a
Wow.
lot of work.
Cool.
Like I can't count how many truckloads I had to take to the dump. And just like old stuff that was in there, and old products from other businesses that were in there and laying around. And yeah, and then that's really how that started. And I reached out to the local community, and I said, "Look, I'm starting this kind of concept, and I really need some old skin on frame kayaks to kind of cover this building up." And so a number of people in the community said, "Oh, I have an old skin on frame sitting in my garage that I'm not using anymore. I'm happy to donate that to the space." And
Cool. Yeah.
it was amazing, the amount of people that were reaching out saying, "Oh, I've got this, I've got that." And so I spent basically that 2.5 months cleaning it and driving around Vancouver Island and Vancouver area collecting all of these pieces. And I put it all together, and I literally built the vision that I had when I was looking in that window that first day.
Wow.
And it was almost exactly to the vision that I had, that I ended up building it. And in fact, about a year into the project, I had completed the tunnel of kayaks that wrapped around the walls all over the ceiling. So when you walked into this building, you were literally like encompassed by skin on frame kayaks. And the majority of them were just frames. I'd taken the skins off because
Mm-hmm.
I love the way that a skin on frame looks like with the skin off, all that hard work. And beautiful artwork.
Yeah, I always feel like it's a shame to cover up those frames.
Yeah, really, really it is. I almost like to say like a skin on frame looks better when it's naked.
Yeah.
You know, and the thing is too, when you're building a kayak like that, you're going through the woodwork. There's like, for a lot of builders, not for all, but for a lot of builders, we really go through this meticulous process of making sure that all the joints are fitted perfectly and the lashing looks beautiful, and
Yeah.
all of this like dedication and 100 hours of work going into this woodwork, all to get covered by a piece of canvas, you know,
Yeah.
that's often just stitched together and kind of looks Frankenstein looking, you know. So
Yep.
so yeah, the wreckage really became this place that really expressed the tradition of kayaking. And I often said too that like people would walk into it and they'd be like, "My God, like what did I just walk into?" And it was like they just walked into my passion.
Mm-hmm.
So it became a place to celebrate the tradition of kayaking. I was also building skin on frame kayaks with clients in there during the winter time. And so I ended up building a number of kayaks in there with clients. We did end up having a little bit of a retail space over in the corner that helped kind of pay the bills to keep it correct kind of going. But yeah, it was really a magical place. And I didn't just build it for myself. I built it for the community as a celebration for the kayak community. But then I also had done the work for the local community so that the building was being sort of brought back.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I got to tell you, when I started there, countless leaks, like just leaking everywhere. And I was like chasing leak after leak after leak, trying to figure out where all these problems were coming from. But, you know, living in an RV for so many years, I became used to doing that.
Yeah. Now, did you have previous construction experience? And
I don't have a lot of experience really with construction or anything like that, but my father was sort of a jack of all trades, if you will, and did a lot of carpentry work and plumbing and all of those types of things. So I kind of grew up working around that, and I'm pretty handy myself and able to kind of make my MacGyver my way through things, I guess, if you will, which really was all that was required in that building, because I'll tell you that the building was definitely not built to code. And every time I turned around and I pulled another board off, I was like, oh boy, here we go. You know, I was almost just covering things up as I was kind of going through a process.
Hmm.
But it was a very special place. It had a good vibe to it. It really was like when you walked into the building, it's like it had this heartbeat to it. Really special. And to pair that up with traditional kayaking and woodworking like that, it just felt right. And there was a lot of locals that had come in there and said, you know, this has been so many different businesses over the years, and really this feels like the best match for it.
Wow.
So yeah, it was really sad when it all had to kind of come to an end. And like I said, that happened really because as we were expanding, doing things, so the idea really, what I wanted to do was start building skin on frame kayaks with the local community and with First Nations, and putting programs together to help get youth into kayaking. And so part of that became turning it into a not-for-profit organization.
Okay.
And so we went through the process of doing all of that. And then as we were changing business hands over from Manke Kayak over to the organization, that's when permitting started to hit us. And if we were going to make it a not-for-profit, we had to go through this extensive sort of process. So that's when things kind of hit the fan.
Hmm. So, was it necessary to become a nonprofit?
I think it was. It
Hmm.
was getting like the way that I was running it, it was not necessarily what I would consider a profitable sort of business.
Okay.
Basically, it was making ends meet. I was paying the bills, and I was able to keep things kind of floating. But I was really just supporting my passion, is really what I was doing.
Hmm.
A majority of what I was doing, making money, was traveling and teaching
Hmm.
and doing instruction. And really, I didn't need the physical building in order to do any of that. The building itself was more open as a museum, and public would come in during the summertime, which is maybe 4 months of the year. And they would leave a small donation, and that would help to pay for some of the rent. And then in the wintertime, like I said, I was building kayaks with clients, and that was being put toward paying the rent. And so after doing that for a few years, I was like, this isn't what I would consider a profitable business. I mean, it was paying its bills, but I wanted to see that expand and turn into like giving back to the local community. And to give back to the local community require getting grants and funds and all sorts of other things.
Okay.
And to do that, you need to be a not-for-profit, not necessarily a business. So
Okay.
that's where that shift really came from. Was I didn't necessarily need the physical location for my business purposes, but I wanted to see it expand into something bigger and better. And so that's where the not-for-profit concept sort of came from.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. It was sad. It was sad when it all kind of came down to the end where, I had shifted this over, I changed business names, I had done all this work, and then it came down to, wow, if we have to do all of these changes to the building in order to comply with permits and stuff like this, it's going to be extensive. And the landlord really just didn't have the funding to do that, nor did the organization at that point, because we were such a fresh organization and didn't have the funding for it. And so that's where the decision came to close.
Hmm.
And I have to tell you, like taking it apart, all the pieces that were in there and primarily the ones that were donated, a lot of those pieces went back to those individuals, and most of it's sitting actually in a 20-foot storage container right now with the intent to find another location for those pieces. So if there is anybody out there that's wanting to start sort of a traditional style museum or a place of inspiration, kind of like the wreckage was, I've got a good starting point for them. There's a lot of stuff sitting that's waiting to go into the next hands. So, but taking it apart was almost like dismantling a dream, and it was
Oh.
very sad. It was very sad. It was heartbreaking, and I went through a really hard time doing that. But I think what I didn't realize was I was pretty quiet when I went through that process because it was hard on me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and once I kind of had things taken apart, I had, members of the sea kayak community coming to visit me, and they walk in and be like, oh, and I didn't realize that they were actually grieving through the process too.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was a difficult thing. And then having to like go through that grieving with them every time somebody came back to the building was like I had to go through it so many times.
Oh, yeah.
It was really a difficult thing. And like, do I regret ever doing it? Absolutely not. I think that it still was a special time in my life that I was able to express that passion, if you will, to other people. I think it inspired a lot of people that walked into the building, really was inspiring to them. So, you know, not all good things last forever. And unfortunately that had to be closed. And the next step was, like, what's the next big thing? And Costa Rica was it. When I talked to Kim after coming back from traveling and she said Costa Rica, I thought, you know what, this will be our next step. Like, let's move to Costa Rica and see what happens from there. And as soon as we had bought those tickets, that's when my brain started going. I'm like, what can I do in Costa Rica? And what are the possibilities of Costa Rica, and what would that look like? That's when we decided that if we're going to move to Costa Rica, let's go down there with the intent of setting up kayak retreats to bring international clients down and specialize in something. And so that's sort of where that kind of expanded from.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of how that all kind of came to be. Hard for me to even, honestly, it's really hard for me to even talk about because it makes me emotional just thinking about having to go through that process again.
Yeah.
You know, but onward and forward and looking to the future. And when one dream sort of closes, it's important, I feel, to like focus on the next big dream and push forward. So yeah, Costa Rica, we ended up finding a really nice property. We're on 3 acres with a bunch of fruit trees. We've got a nice house with a guest casita and a pool for rolling kayaks. And
Wow.
yeah, and it's just a beautiful place.
You said it's close to some awesome surfing beaches.
Yeah, we're actually located near a small town called Dominical. And Dominical is sort of the Pacific Southwest side of Costa Rica. There is a world-class surf break in Dominical.
Hmm.
And so that was obviously a big attraction to me personally. And so the place that we have is about 15 minutes out of town at the top of a pretty steep mountain, let's just say.
Hmm.
It's a very difficult place to get to. And you have to have a 4x4 for sure to get here. But yeah, we're kind of tucked up in the jungle, and it's a very peaceful, tranquil place, and it's an absolutely beautiful place to be. So the idea here is that we're sort of working through the process of getting kayaks brought into Costa Rica, and then we're going to open up kayak retreats. So they'll be specialized in kayak rolling and kayak surfing,
Hmm.
and that'll be sort of the idea.
How did you get all your stuff down there? You said you flew down, but what about kayaks and all the gear and everything?
So as far as moving from one country to another, I can tell you that it's definitely challenging to do.
Hmm.
A lot of the stuff that we had in Canada, we purged it and we sold a lot of things. And a lot of the kayaks and stuff, like I said, have been stored, looking for a new home. But my personal kayaks and stuff like that, I've also stored them. I was able to travel down with a folding Greenland kayak. So I've got the Nautilus Nook kayak down here with me currently,
Hmm.
and some gear with me and some paddles. And I do have friends that are coming down this winter that are bringing more folding kayaks and surf kayaks. And then obviously we're going to be looking into possibly bringing down a container as well,
Okay.
in order to bring down more kayaks. So it is a process, I can tell you that. And retreats aren't ready to go yet, but we're in the process of going through all of the paperwork to do that, and getting everything all set up. So it's a lot, and we didn't just move down. The two of us, Kim and I, like we also brought our dogs down with us. So that was a big process.
Wow.
Just
Yeah.
just bringing two dogs down with you on an airplane with the kayak and all your gear and all your stuff is a very challenging thing to do. And I think one of the bigger challenges that we had was literally 4 weeks before we moved, I ended up having a hernia surgery,
Oh, wow.
which which meant that I couldn't lift anything over 10 pounds. Here's poor Kim having to like lift everything and the dogs and everything going through the airport. I'm telling you, it didn't make me look very good.
Yeah.
We actually ended up having some family help us in Vancouver, to get a lot of the stuff on the plane. But once we got to Costa Rica, it was a matter of hiring staff to help us sort of get it from the airport into the car rental, and
Hmm.
a big challenge, a
Wow.
big challenge for sure.
How's your Spanish?
Not great. I'll
No, does
admit
Kim speak
Spanish.
Spanish?
No, but
Okay.
she's picking it up a lot quicker than I am spending time on Duolingo.
Oh, yeah.
Um, I find it a very difficult language to learn. I do know a little bit of Spanish, and it's not a lot. And that just comes from my travels to Chile and South America teaching kayaking. So I do know some words, but not enough to have a conversation with anybody, to be honest. It's definitely something that both Kim and I are working on now that we're down here is working on our Spanish. So give me another year and ask me that question, and I might
Oh,
I might
yeah.
be able to have
Yeah, I'm sure
might
you'll
be able
pick
to
it
have a
up.
conversation with you. But I think it's also not super helpful that we're way up in the mountains, kind of secluded by ourselves up here
Okay, yeah.
either, right? So the more we get into town and the more we kind of converse with locals and start to communicate more with other people, I think it's going to get picked up a lot quicker.
Yeah.
So
Sounds like it wasn't much of a issue being able to find this place and live there with with this language barrier.
yeah, I think Costa Rica is kind of an exception to a lot of countries in South America or Central America. Costa Rica is very much an expat country. There's a
Okay.
lot of expats here, a lot of Americans and Canadians living here, so a lot of English speakers. And the locals have kind of adapted to that a lot. Their second language is English. There's a lot of English speaking. Whenever you go into any of the shops and stores, they will speak to you in English mostly. with exception to a few of them. But I think the tourism industry here is very based around English. So
Yeah.
it's not a hard country to move to if you don't speak Spanish. You could just get away with speaking English here and get. The other thing is Google Translator is an amazing tool.
Yeah.
It's really helped us through a lot of issues and speaking with those that don't necessarily speak English. And so that's been quite helpful for us as well.
Yeah.
But but yeah, Costa Rica is a very English friendly country, and it's quite encouraged for people to come to Costa Rica and to set up businesses. There are definitely some laws that go along with it that we're going through right now, and some paperwork you got to get through. But it's an encouraged thing to come down and to set up. There is also a lot of people that work remotely
Yeah.
here in Costa Rica as well, right? So that's
Digital nomads.
yeah, it's a digital nomad land. So there is a lot of digital nomads that are living around here, a lot. So that's also helpful when you move to a country where a lot of the people that are living here you can speak English with, and they've had the experience of moving here as well. So it's not like you're moving to a country kind of blindfolded and not knowing the language or not knowing what the next steps are. You can really reach out to others and go through that process. So
Now, you said that your daughter lives there, or she was living there?
she did live here for a number of years with a family, yeah, and so that's how we had originally come down here
Hmm.
and fell in love with it. And my other daughter is actually planning on coming down here in January, so she'll be down here spending a few months with us. You know, some people say, well, you're moving so far away, like what about your family and all your friends? And I got to tell you, when you move to a beautiful place like Costa Rica, that's typically not a problem because everybody wants to come and visit you. You know,
Yeah.
so it's kind of like when we moved to Baja, Mexico. We were there for like we were 7 or 8 months. We were in Baja, Mexico. We thought, oh man, no family or friends, but like I think we had more family and friends visit us there than we did when we lived in Canada.
Yeah.
So, and when we moved here to Costa Rica too, also setting up sort of a resort sort of area like this, having a guest casita, it was kind of a given for us. That way, friends can come and visit. We've got a place for them to stay right on the property. And so it just makes it a lot easier.
Now, is there a lot of remodeling that you need to do on your place?
Uh, Not a lot. I wouldn't
No.
say it's the wreckage.
Yeah.
It's not the wreckage, but I'm definitely having to be a MacGyver all over again in different ways. We've had challenges. I'll just say that. Costa Rican houses are not necessarily built the same way they are in North America. I mean, when we moved in, we had a couple leaks going on and in the house, and one of those leaks was leaking right on our Wi-Fi, and so that
Mm.
went down, and just all sorts of things. I mean, we had our hot water tank, not hot water tank, but a hot water on demand. That just wasn't working when we got here, and so we had to get somebody to come in and fix that, and they came in and they're like, oh yeah, mañana, we'll be here tomorrow. And of course that was 2 weeks later, and then they showed up and installed it 2 weeks later, and as they're driving out the driveway, I go and test it, and the thing blows up and there's fire shooting up the wall, and chase them down the road, and back they come again, and oh yeah, mañana, we'll have it fixed. And it was another 3 weeks later, but now we have hot water. It's been about 6.5 weeks, but now we've got hot water. So there's a lot of cold showers when we got here. Just small things,
Yeah.
nothing that really breaks the deal. But I think when you add up all the small things like that, for some people, it could probably drive them nuts. And in North America, we're very used to people sticking to this, to them saying, if I'm coming tomorrow, then you better be coming tomorrow, right? And that's just, you just kind of get used to this sort of, pura vida sort of, everything's good, it's all relaxed, no worries, and that just means things happen a lot slower here.
Yeah.
So
Well, how about the local kayaking community? Is there such a thing? Have you gotten in contact with sea kayakers down there?
it's not very big,
Yeah.
like, surprisingly. And you would think in a beautiful country like this, on a coastline like this, you'd have sea kayaks all over the place. But I think one of the biggest challenges here with sea kayaking is the import costs of kayaks.
Hmm.
Bringing in sea kayaks into Costa Rica can be very, very expensive, as I can assure you, because I'm going through all those details now. In some cases, 90 to 100% import tax on a kayak.
Oh, wow.
So at the cost of sea kayaks these days, and we all know those are not cheap, you better be ready to spend some money if you're going to be bringing kayaks into the country. So I think as a result of that, it's not necessarily a large market here currently. There are local companies that offer kayaking and rafting services and so forth, but a lot of those are sit on top kayaks.
Okay.
And so there is some local companies, one of them which I am looking to work with and partner in with. And there's one in Dominical, actually, which is close to me. And there are a few other outfits that are sort of scattered around Costa Rica that I've now been in contact with and am looking to collaborate with them as well. So, and I think that's really an important thing to do when you move to another country, is not just move to another country and start your own thing, but to make sure that you're collaborating and reaching out to the others that are already here and sort of expanding on and offering new services and that sort of stuff. But as far as Greenland kayaking goes, I can assure you it is very small here. If it's even existent, I have no idea, but I have not yet found anybody doing Greenland kayaking or Greenland rolling here. In fact, a lot of the outfits that I've have talked to, they don't even know what I'm talking about when I say Greenland kayaking. So I'm hoping, if I have any influence on that Greenland kayaking will expand at least a little bit here in Costa Rica. And another thing is too, like when you have the challenges of importing kayaks into a country like that, there is the option of building skin on frame kayaks, right? And I did bring my kayak building tools with me. So it's just a matter of finding the materials, and I don't think those materials are going to be the same as what we can necessarily find in other countries. But I think that's kind of the Greenlandic way, isn't it? Is just kind of finding what you can find and making do.
Yeah.
And so a plan of mine is to start building skin on frame kayaks down here to kind of expand on a bit of a fleet as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, as far as kayaking goes here, I think it's still a pretty niche market. It's pretty small. There's not a lot of competition when it comes to sea kayaking here, but it is a beautiful, beautiful place. And I think it would attract a lot of sea kayakers coming down here.
Now, have you done a lot of kayaking there?
I have not. No, I mean, I've only just moved here, right? And
Yeah.
just recovering from my hernia
All
surgery.
right.
So only now am I actually in shape to be getting back onto the water, which will happen very soon. The surgery recovery for me was a little bit more extensive than for others. It was, just a hard process to go through, but I couldn't even imagine rolling a kayak after that surgery. Like I was like, man, I could hardly even move. So, but now I am starting to get, doing some stretching and being a little bit more active, swimming, and that I'm starting to get the strength back and starting to be a lot less sore than I was. So within the next week or so here, I'm going to be back in that pool religiously every single day rolling, and I'll be back on the water surfing. That's for sure. That's coming up. The local kayak company that's down in Dominical is also kind of encouraging me to come out doing some whitewater kayaking with them as well. So
Oh, yeah.
I'll probably get into doing some of that stuff as well here in Costa Rica, because whitewater kayaking is pretty popular here.
Oh, okay.
That's definitely something that's popular. So, and whitewater kayaking is nothing that I haven't really done a lot of whitewater kayaking. I mean,
Didn't you go down the Grand Canyon?
Yeah, the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I paddled down the Grand Canyon with a sea kayak fully loaded and a Greenland paddle. That was a number of years ago. That was kind of a crazy thing to do. Very surreal experience, let's just say. But yeah, I think that would be really the extent of my whitewater paddling,
Uh-huh.
But I am a rough water paddler. I do like to paddle big water in the sea. And so if I'm going to be running any kind of waters, it's going to start out pretty small and maybe work my way up with it. But
Oh, I'm sure with your skills you'll pick it up very quickly.
I'm sure it'll be fun.
Yeah.
I mean, whitewater kayaking's always kind of scared me a little bit, just because of its retention. Like, yeah, it's just it can be dangerous, right? And
Oh
so I
yeah.
think taking it slowly is kind of a wise approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I did it for a couple of years, and then I sold all my whitewater. I had like a couple whitewater kayaks, and I sold those. You really need to be with people who know the river,
Yes.
and then the river changes all the time. So it wasn't something that fit into my lifestyle, which is I usually go paddling alone.
Right. Not really the wise option in a river.
Yeah, I couldn't go out often enough to really develop the skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Even when we did the Grand Canyon, the paddlers that I went with all had whitewater experience, right? I think I was the only one that didn't have whitewater or river experience. And even then, before we hit the Grand Canyon, it's like you said, depending on the levels, can be completely a different environment. So we had gone to a fellow named Reg Lake, who's quite well known in the States there. And Reg really gave us kind of a guideline. He gave us a book with all the different rapids at different levels and was like, if it's like this, you got to run on this side. And if it's this, you run on this side. And so we kind of had a bit of a cheat sheet going down it, which was very, very helpful.
Yeah.
And we ended up partnering up with I think it was 5 whitewater kayakers in our permit to go down the Grand Canyon. And every time we get to a rapid, everybody would get out and kind of scout the rapid. But there were as many cases when us as sea kayakers, because we had this kind of cheat sheet from Reg, we would be like, yeah, we're not getting out to scout. We're just running left, river left. And they're like, you guys are crazy.
Was Reg with you on the trip?
No, no, no. No, but Reg has run the river numerous times and is kind of a pioneer in the whitewater industry, right?
Yeah.
So he had done it so many times and is also a mentor to myself and to others. And so, he was like, you guys got to stop by and I'll give you guys a little bit of insight before you hit that thing. He wasn't necessarily with us, but he was with us, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
His knowledge was with us.
Hmm. The spirit of Reg.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the biggest pieces of advice he gave us, we broke it. Like he said to us, he was like, never camp just before one of the biggest rapids. He
Okay.
said, because if you do, you're going to hear it all night and it's going to haunt you and you're going to think about it and it's going to haunt you. And the next day you're just going to mess up your lines. Like it's just a thing. You just don't do it. He said. And
Wow.
sure enough, we ended up doing it one night. And yeah, it was not good. I can't remember the rapid, but it definitely haunted us through the evening.
Wow, that's amazing. Such wisdom from Reg.
Oh yeah. That man is a wealth of knowledge, absolute wealth of knowledge, and still a really good friend of mine. Great, great mentor.
Such insight into how important your mental state is
Yeah,
in your performance.
100%. 100%. I mean, I think that's a big part of a lot of rough water paddling is your mental state and, like the way that you approach things and how the calmer you can be about things and the more collective you can sort of be about it, the better off you're going to be. If your mental state is not in the right place, man, I can tell you it's going to go wrong.
Yeah. Well, same with rolling, same with learning any
Yeah,
new skill.
absolutely. I think rolling again, like rolling is a mental game. A big piece of rolling is a mental game.
Oh, yeah.
And just being in the right mind state, it can make all the difference in the world when it comes to rolling a kayak properly.
Just curious, do you
So,
have a specific technique to get yourself into the proper mental state for dealing with these kind of physical challenges in surfing or rolling?
I think that has changed a little bit over the years for me. And what I mean by that is a lot of times when I would go rough water paddling in the beginning, I would just spend time by myself, kind of not being overly chatty with anybody, but just kind of being in my own space and kind of just focusing. And that often helped me in the beginning. But in recent years, doing more of kind of like a meditation,
Mm.
like sitting in front of the water and just going through a meditative process. And I've been able to get better at that through the years. And actually, Eichi Ito is last year taught me some very good techniques on doing that.
Oh,
And often now when we go, even when we teach, if we're going to teach a class or a workshop, we've started doing a small meditation process together where we go sit by the water and we get into a state of meditation and focus on candles in the mind and these different techniques that he kind of taught me. And that is hugely helpful. Just taking yourself, relaxing yourself, and bringing yourself into a meditative state is the great way to start something like that, especially teaching. Because when you're teaching and primarily teaching kayak rolling or surfing, kayak surfing, your demeanor and the way that you are will reflect on your students. You know what I mean?
yep.
And so if you can enter into that classroom or into that workshop in a sense of peace almost,
Hmm.
that really kind of transfers over to the students in a big way. And I think that's important. But I think if there is any sort of technique on doing it, one of the techniques that I used to use in the beginning was I used to listen to more therapeutic type of music on the drive to surfing, for example. Or I'd listen to like opera, or I'd listen to like something that was just very peaceful kind of music. And it almost would just put me into this state of relaxation. And then when I got there, I was just like ready to go. Where
Okay.
it probably would have been like a bad idea to listen to heavy metal and get there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it just would have made me anxious and worked up and wound up to go. But I mean, I think it's different for everybody, every individual. Another thing that I used to do, and this is years ago actually, when I was rolling, I actually would put in waterproof headphones underneath my tulip, and I would listen to very calm music and roll with the music.
Oh, wow.
People didn't know I was doing it because they couldn't see them because they were
Uh-huh.
underneath my tulip. But I actually had waterproof headphones that I plugged in and put my iPhone underneath my dry suit, and I would listen to very calm, kind of like meditative type of music or some kind of opera or something that was really just kind of peaceful.
Yeah, I got to try that. I got to try that next time I go rolling.
Yeah, that actually works really, really well.
Well, now that you mentioned Ichi Ito, let's talk about your Stay Salty World Tour that
Yeah,
started last year
it did.
and is continuing on into 2025.
Yeah.
You first met Ichi years ago with the Guts event.
Yes.
So, how did your relationship develop from there to the point where now you're doing this Stay Salty World Tour together?
Yeah. So when I started rolling many years back, I don't know how many years ago, it must be 17 years or so ago, 17 maybe. I had put like a video online, I think, to show my father because my father wanted to see me doing some of these rolls. And I ended up putting some videos up on Facebook for him to see. And they kind of took off a little bit. People were like, man, where are you learning how to do all this stuff? And Eichi Ito was one of the first people that actually reached out to me. And he was like, you got to come to Japan and teach. And I remember replying to him being like, no, no, Ichi, like, I don't teach this stuff. Like, this is just something that I do. Like, it's kind of like therapy to me. Like, for me, rolling, it was all about overcoming my fear of the water.
Hmm.
And so he was like, oh, you need to teach this stuff. Come to Japan and teach it. And I said, no, no, that's not something I can do. And he said, well, he's like, I think you can teach. And he really encouraged me to start teaching. And I started to teach only to discover that I had a bit of a knack for it. And I was like, man, this actually is something that I might be able to do. And I ended up teaching at the very first event ever was at Guts in Japan. And that's a story all on its own. But that was quite the experience for me going all the way to Japan. And, there were, I think, 6 other members of Kwanakatofiat that were there. And it was this big kind of event. And I was quite inspired by that. And from that point forward, I started to teach quite a lot. And that's really where I initially met Ichi. And Ichi continued to bring me back to Japan a number of times. And then we started running into each other at different international symposiums. And I think actually Delmarva was one of the ones that we saw each other at. But we were at a symposium teaching together in Greece one year. And this is a couple years ago.
Okay.
And when we were there, we were teaching together. It was just Eichi and I, that we were the two sort of guest instructors teaching. We're teaching one day and we got out of the water and we're standing in the sun and we dried off very quickly from the sun. And the salt content there is pretty high. And so we look like these scaly kind of like lizards with our like salt encrusted all over our arms and on our suits and stuff. And this student walked up to us and said, "Oh, you guys are so salty. You guys got to go have a shower." And and I looked over at the student and I said, "No," I said, "we have to stay salty." And Ichi looked at me with these eyes and he's like, "Oh, yes, we got to keep practicing. We have to stay salty." And I said, "Yes, like never shower, right? We're not showering. We're just going to stay salty." And so it just sort of became this thing that we continued to say throughout that symposium to our students was like, stay salty, just keep practicing, don't ever have a shower, just always be in the water and always roll your kayak, stay salty. And it just sort of became this humorous saying that we would say. And in fact, we were doing a demo on one, and often I'll be standing in the water beside Ichi. Ichi's rolling the kayak. And as he's going through the process, I'm kind of explaining it. And I had said to Ichi on one roll, I said, "Okay, this time go under the water and stay under the water for a little while. I want to explain a few things before you come up." So he tips upside down and he's upside down and I'm talking a little bit too much. And now he's under the water for quite a while. And Ichi kind of just pokes his head out of the water and he says, "Are you ready?" And I look at him, I say, stay salty. And I push his head back under the water. and this just became this kind of this thing that Ichi and I were doing at this symposium. And at the end of the symposium, or near the end of the symposium, Ichi and I went out for a dinner. And we got into this pretty in-depth conversation about, we're getting older, and we need to pass off our skills. And, like Ichi's like, "Yeah, I've only got so many more years of doing this." He's like, "What am I going to do? Like, what should I do? Like, I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this." And I said, "Man," I said, if you really think you've only got so many more years of doing this," I said, "now's the time just to explode and like go all out." I'm like, if you need to share your knowledge and you've only got so much time to do it, I said, travel all around the world as much as you possibly can and share that knowledge as far and as widespread as you can. And in turn, whenever you pass away or whenever you're gone, you'll continue to live through your inspiration. And Ichi's like, "Oh, that's a great idea, really good idea, but I can't do that on my own." And I said, "Well, then what if I do it with you?" And
Wow.
that's kind of how that started. He's like, "Really, you would do that with me?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Absolutely. If it's your mission to travel around the world and to spread your knowledge as far and wide as you can to leave your mark in this industry," I said, 100%, I'll join you and I'll help you with that. And he said, "Okay, let's do it." And I said, "Okay, we're going to do a world tour." And then I looked at each and I said, "Okay, if we're going to do a world tour, we got to come up with a name." And he immediately said, "Stay salty." And so that's kind of how that all came to be. And so in Greece, we came up with this concept of a world tour, teaching as many people around the world as we can how to roll a kayak under this sort of stay salty concept. And that was in maybe August,
Okay, just this past summer.
not this past summer, the summer before.
Okay.
And that's when we had the conversation. And then I went home and started organizing the Stay Salty tour, consulting back and forth with Ichi on many, many, many different Skype calls. And months later, I think it started in, I believe we did our first round in February or March, which was only like 5 months, 6 months after we had the conversation. And we went to Europe. We first went to France. And then from France, I believe we went to Italy. And then from Italy, we went to, oh man, I'm drawing a gap here. Anyway, we did 5 different countries in all of
Wow.
Europe. And we traveled from one to the next under this Stay Salty tour concept. Germany was the other, UK was another. We just bounced through countries. and we were gone for 6 weeks, I believe, in our first leg that we did.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did a second leg in Europe later on in the summer. So we went back to Europe. If I believe correctly, in our last year, I guess that would be still this year. So from the beginning of the year until now, 10 countries.
Wow.
Including Canada and Japan, because I went back to Japan and Eichi also came to Canada, and we ran Stay Salty in those two countries.
Wow, that's really impressive.
Yeah. So from having a conversation at dinner, a heartfelt conversation, coming up with the Stay Salty World Tour concept, 6 months later to start traveling, and within the first year, 10 countries. And now we are going back to Europe in September, I believe. Yeah, September, beginning of September, and we'll be in Europe for a full 4.5 weeks. And we're in Ireland, Switzerland, back to Ireland again this year we're doing actual retreats. So it'll be like a Stay Salty 2.0 retreat in Ireland. We got 2 of those going on. And then we've got Switzerland and we got United Kingdom again lined up. But actually before that, this coming March, which is only, I guess, 4 months away, we're currently lining up Argentina, Brazil, and Chile.
Mm.
So yeah, last year we ended up doing a lot of it, and then we decided it was so successful that we're just going to continue doing it because the world's a big place and we got to hit everywhere. So
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's been hugely successful. Like what we've done in the past is get organizers from different countries to sort of help us. And in almost every single case, as soon as it gets advertised, it's filled out within either hours or days. And we've got waiting lists. And many of those countries we're going back again a second time to actually try to fill the interest.
So you're the one who contacts all these people and gets it all set up. Wow.
Yeah. So I'm primarily sort of the administrator, if you will, for it all, helping because Ichi's English isn't as good as mine, obviously, and I'm able to kind of go through all that process. So I help a lot with the administration part of Stay Salty and organize everything. And this year, now that we're doing more retreat style stuff, it's even becoming more organization in order to do it. Booking our flights and all of that kind of stuff. So it's become a job.
Yeah.
But it's very empowering. It's an honor to be able to help Eichi with that vision. It's become a part of my personal vision now and a big part of who I am. It's amazing. It really is amazing. And like I said, after doing those 2 legs to Europe, going back to Ucluelet, to the wreckage, only to discover things were kind of hitting the fan and falling apart, I was like, man, like this Stay Salty World Tour thing is like taking off and it's like inspiring me, and it's just what I wanted to continue doing. Costa Rica is really a central location to the world, and living somewhere centered to the world makes it a lot easier for me to travel around the world and teach.
Yeah.
And so like when you look at Central and South America in the wintertime, that's when you go down there. And then in the summertime, we're up in North America and in European countries.
Yeah. So you can do this year round and
yeah. And the good thing for Ichi is now that he's at retirement age in Japan, when you retire, it just means that you work part-time. And so now that he's down to part-time hours with his animation job in Japan, he's got a lot more free time to be able to do these types of tours and these trips. So basically I help organize all of this stuff, and then he takes the time off and we go and teach together. And teaching together has been amazing. Like the way that we really view Stay Salty is Ichi is the animation and I'm the voice. Together we're one, essentially. So I help communicate and he helps animate. And collectively, we become this kind of entity, if you will.
What do you mean by animate?
Animate meaning like as I'm describing things, Ichi's literally physically doing the animation of it, moving around, being very. And if you've ever met Eichi, you'll know he's a very animated character naturally,
Uh-huh.
right?
And
So
he's a professional animator.
he's a professional animator. It's what he does for a living. So he's very good at communicating through his actions and a very talented instructor as a result of that. But where his challenges are with the communication of the language.
Okay.
And so when we partner together, we put those two good pieces together and become a bigger thing, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And you would think, traveling around the world with somebody after a while, you're just going to go crazy and you're going to end up having some conflict or something's going to happen. But Ichi and I have really developed a very special relationship and we communicate very well. So, whenever one of us is not doing well, either emotionally or in another way, we pick it up very quickly because we spend so much time together, and immediately we're on top of it and we're like communicating, talking, supporting each other. And I think that's been extremely helpful. But I think our secret weapon is we spend a lot of time laughing.
Hmm.
There's a lot of laughter when we teach together. There's a lot of laughter when we spend time together. It is our superpower, is really just humor and laughing and always making the best of a bad situation. When you travel and you do all sorts of things, like, you're bound to run into problems.
Yeah.
You're bound to run into delays. You're bound to, like, things are going to happen. And it's just something that we communicate about a lot. And when it happens, we just kind of look at each other and start laughing, rather than dwelling on the problem. So yeah, Stay Salty has become a very, very important part of my life over the last year. And I think Ichi's as well. So yeah, we're excited to continue it on through 2025, and who knows, maybe into 2016 and further, or 2020, 25 and 26 rather. I'm jumping back 10 years now.
Wow, sounds like a wonderful partnership.
It
We'd like to be
is.
able to work together like that. Congratulations on being able to achieve that.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Thank you. I think it's I think it's a big thing for a lot of people. Is a lot of people have a dream or they have a vision of doing something, but it's taking action that really holds them back. And it's something that I've just always, I don't know if this is ingrained in me when I was younger. My parents were very adamant that, like, if I had a passion, that I needed to go all in. That's the wreckage was a good example of it. I feel like if you have a dream, dreams come true. It's just about taking the action, you
Yeah.
know. And so for a lot of people that's hard though, right?
Yeah, the wreckage is a great example of how you had a very clear vision of what you wanted and this desire to make it happen.
Yeah. And I mean, I think had I shared that vision with other people and said this is what I'm going to do, they would have said you're crazy.
Yeah.
You're like, you're crazy. Who just gets to live their passion and do that? And it's like, well, anybody can really do that. I think you just have to put the effort into going forward and doing it. There's risks that are obviously taken when you do it. I mean, I took a risk doing the wreckage. I mean, it didn't last forever. That was a risk that I took. Luckily, I didn't lose money doing that. Same with Stay Salty. It's a risk that we took moving forward with that concept and idea. But I would say it was a good risk to take. I mean, we've been very successful with the tour, and so far we've inspired hundreds of paddlers through that process. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Excellent.
worth it.
Yeah. You're one of these people who are able to take this vision and bring it into reality, whatever it is.
Well, I feel like the fact that I'm able to do that, it's like almost feels like a responsibility almost to do it. I don't know if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah.
Like, if it can inspire other people to take a dream and make it happen, then I think it was worth it. And I think the wreckage really did that. A lot of people walked into the wreckage. In fact, I've had numerous emails and contacts from people just that have come to the wreckage. And these are people that aren't even kayakers, came to the wreckage and emailed me after or communicated me with in some means afterwards, social media or whatever it was, and said, as a result of going and seeing the wreckage and what you put together following your passion, I've decided to do the same with my passion.
Wow.
And that right there was worth it all. Maybe jumping forward into a dream is uh, a bit risky, I guess you could say, for a lot of people. I'm very much a risk taker. I've always been a risk taker, and I feel like following your dreams is the only way to live your life. Like the last thing I want to do is be stuck doing something I don't want to do. Right? It's like my well-being and my happiness, I think, are worth more than that. And perhaps it comes from a background of depression and having to deal with that. And then once I discovered that I had this ability to almost manifest things,
Mm-hmm.
I really grabbed onto it. I was like, man, if I can just manifest something and make it happen, then what if I do this? And then I would go forward and try it, and sure enough, I could make it happen. And I was like, man, well, if I can do that, well, what about this? And I think once you do that enough times, you really start to convince yourself that it works.
Yeah. And you have done it. You've done it throughout your life,
Throughout my
several
life, I
times.
continue to do it. I do it through all sorts of things, like even from small things to the biggest things. I manifest things constantly, and I become very good at manifesting. And I think that as a result of like learning how to do that and believing in myself and being able to accomplish some of those things, that that's a skill set that I can help other people with. You know what I mean? It's not like I can teach somebody how to manifest something, but I can certainly be an example of it. And if I can be an example of it, then maybe it'll encourage them to give it a shot or try.
How would you describe the process? Knowing what you want, focus.
It starts with having obviously the idea, but there's also, I think, if you have a bit of obsessive compulsiveness in your personality,
Yeah.
it can be very helpful, because if you put toward the effort of constantly sort of, if you will, obsessing about that, and putting your personal energy toward that, and rather than saying I think I will do that, it's I will do that.
Yeah.
And if you continue to do that, your mind is a very powerful thing, and you'd be bloody shocked at what it can do when you convince yourself that it's going to happen. And I think another part of manifesting something is being vocal about it and holding yourself accountable.
Uh,
So like if I say I'm going to do this, rather than just kind of keeping that to myself, at a certain point of that process, I'm going to be very vocal about it and say, this is what I'm going to do. And people might say, oh, well, you're crazy. And it's like, well, now that I've said I'm going to do it, I got to do it.
yeah. Yeah. You committed.
You're committed to it at that point. And I think that's part of the manifestation process. Because a lot of times too, whenever in a lot of situations that I start to vocally talk about something that I'm going to do, I'll find that there's going to be a lot of people that maybe try to discourage it. But within that, there's going to be people that embrace it. And there's actually going to be people within that are going to help you get there.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of a part of the process is being vocal about it and learning not to be discouraged by the ones that tell you can't do it, and almost use that as fuel to get you there. And you'll find that there's going to be a handful of people within that actually help you get there, because big dreams are hard to get to on your own. Like sometimes that takes others to kind of help uplift you and take you there. A lot of people wonder that about me. They're like, man, you always have these big dreams, and then all of a sudden they happen, and it's like, well, that's just manifesting. That's all it is. Like this isn't something I created. Like there's studies on manifesting things. Like this is not a new thing.
Yeah. When I look back on my life, I realize that this is the secret to when I've been successful and explains when I have not been successful.
Exactly. And I think if you look at people that are very successful in certain areas or make these big kind of dreams come true, you start to look at how they got there. And that's exactly how they got there. It's the power of the human mind. It truthfully is. And as much as that can sound like fictitious or like bullshit, it's a thing, man. It's really a thing. We have the ability to literally make things happen. And I think once you start to believe that, And once you have done it a number of times to the point where you're convinced it works, then those dreams that you reach for can be bigger.
Well, a lot of us have these limiting beliefs about
Yeah,
ourselves and what we can accomplish.
it's our own worst enemy. So I mean, even coming to Costa Rica, I was like, okay, we're going to Costa Rica. Like, what's a wild thing I can do in Costa Rica? I'm like, man, I've got all these clients around the world. Like, how awesome would it be for me to run these like personalized little retreats where all of these amazing clients that I know get to come share paradise with me and just hang out with me in paradise, and I can make a living doing that. Most people would be like, man, you're just a dreamer. Like, there's no way in hell anybody's going to drop $1 on doing that. And I'm telling you right now, I've got a waiting list that's longer. Like, I got 2-3 years worth of clients
Wow.
waiting for this, to the point where it doesn't even have to be advertised.
Wow.
I think when the dream is big enough, it becomes more attractive. For Stay Salty, it's like, oh, we're going to travel around the world and inspire as many paddlers as we possibly can. It's like, now people want to be involved in that. Now people want to take that workshop, because that's a big thing. That's not just a kayak course that's being taught. It's a bigger vision.
Okay, well, let's wrap it up there.
All right.
It was awesome talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again on the show.
Good luck to you.
All right.
Talk to you later.
All right, you take care. We'll talk to you soon.